Strengthening multilateralism and developing cooperation in trade and finance are on top of the agenda for the 12th BRICS Summit, which is starting tomorrow. The summit will be held virtually with heads of state of member countries, Brazil, Russia, India, China and South Africa. This after it was postponed in July due to the COVID-19 pandemic. The summit, which is being chaired by Russia, will also enable member states to compare notes on the upcoming G20 meeting later this week. For more on what we can expect at the BRICS Summit, we're now joined via Zoom by Professor Patrick Bond from the School of Government at the University of the Western Cape. Prof, thanks very much indeed for joining us and welcome to the programme.
No, thanks, Peter. Good to be with you and the viewers.
All right, so a very different setup in terms of doing it virtually, but I guess it's the same kind of business on the table for the BRICS nations.
Yes, with obviously differences because of the COVID crisis and the need for vaccines, including Russian and Chinese, to get widely distributed as soon as possible. The other couple of interesting points, Peter, would be the India-China conflict, which is on the border, in which in June, several dozen troops from both India and China lost their lives as they literally were in fisticuffs, throwing each other off the Himalayan mountains in Ladakh. And that is a conflict over the border. It's been brewing for, well, decades, and 3 years ago it nearly prevented the BRICS from happening in China. And what the very talented Russian foreign minister has been unable to do is bring these two giants of Asia and their leaders, Xi Jinping and Narendra Modi, together as BRICS really, originally identified a site to set up a different kind of geopolitics. So it's always interesting every year, this BRICS meeting for South Africans to say, well, what really is happening out there? And it is an ugly scene in which a brand new development, which I was surprised by, counterterrorism as one of the key points for discussion in Russia tomorrow, which I think is probably a way for Lavrov, the foreign minister of Russia, to sort of bring the Islamophobic, let's say quite frankly, Narendra Modi and the Xi Jinping and the repression of the Uyghurs in Xinjiang in the west of China, together with the Russians who've had also histories of repressing Muslims in Chechnya or before that in Afghanistan. It's a very interesting moment where they're trying to say, well, this is what we do have in common. We don't like Muslims. And South Africa hasn't been in that situation, nor has Brazil. However, in South Africa, the dilemma is in Mozambique, in Cabo Delgado, a war has broken out where Islamic extremists are going for areas where there's $128 billion of oil. And that's where Durko, the foreign ministry here, Naledi Pandor, our foreign minister, said, well, maybe we need that oil and gas. Maybe we should bring in, let's say, NDF troops. So we could see an unfortunate unraveling of what South Africa has always done well, which is to stay clear of Islamophobia.
All right, so quite a lot on the table, these tensions. I mean, you started off with this bizarre story of this border dispute. And I understand the reason that they beat each other to death is that they agreed not to fire their arms. And so there was nothing about hitting each other with fists. And that is quite a serious thing. This border just doesn't want to get settled, this dispute. How can the partners, Brazil, South Africa, help Russia in this issue?
Well, it may not be possible because there's even a deeper problem not too far away from Ladakh, where these fisticuffs that led to several dozen of the Chinese and Indian troops losing their lives in June occurred. And that is Kashmir, another very tense situation. And you may remember, Peter, 2.5 years ago when the BRICS met in Santon, there were protesters who nearly prevented Narendra Modi from even arriving in South Africa due to human rights violations that were very explicit in Kashmir. Now, here's the problem. Kashmir is contested, and India has part of it, Pakistan has part. China wants to drive a wedge through it so that they can improve their Western Chinese access to the Arabian Sea. That's a much faster, quicker route to getting Middle Eastern oil and other goods that would be coming, otherwise a very circuitous and dangerous route through the South China Sea. And so this is one of the great geopolitical struggles of our day, which is will China get with its alliance with Pakistan through Kashmir when Narendra Modi doesn't want them anywhere nearby. That's sort of underlying this border conflict. It's a conflict over vast access to resources in a critical part of South Asia.
So this BRICS Summit coincides with the South Africa Investment Forum. Will President Ramaphosa put South Africa on the table and say, friends, please join us, help us?
He may, because really there's nothing from the West that we can see. A few German auto and maybe Japanese auto investments are being mooted, including in a new auto zone in South Durban. But normally this is where you'd really expect the special economic zones to be very attractive to Indian and Chinese investors. And of course, Russia wants to do some nuclear energy generation. You know, Peter, the hotspot for this, for Ramaphosa, who was 2 years ago in Beijing at the FOCAC, the Forum on China-Africa Cooperation. The hotspot, for some reason he chose it, it's his home zone, which is Musina Mercado. It's a special economic zone proposed, and they're already digging. I think they've got 100,000 trees that they're clearing for a metallurgical complex that could be 150 billion rand if that's, you know, the advertised investments come through. So that's really the only major BRICS investment I see occurring, along with this possibility that nuclear energy, very dubious, very expensive, very dangerous, also revives after, of course, you know, Gupta and the Oakleaf uranium company connecting with Zuma in a 2014 deal that was thrown out by the courts for being, you know, illegally constructed. And Eskom, I don't know where they're going to get the money for, you know, these are tens of billions of rands worth of reactors they're talking about. So Grady Montash wants an exit route from the DRC, where it's going to be hard to get the Inga Dam. And he's put on the table, maybe we need nuclear. And so there's a lot of contestation over that. And there always has been in the BRICS, because that's one of the sites where Russia feels it has a major comparative advantage. And I have no doubt they'll be pushing that, although it's, as you say, it's a coinciding investment forum now. The big thing about investment, though, Peter, with the world economy so messed up, there is no foreign direct investment. It's sunk by something like 30% this year, and we don't expect much. Even last year, there was a major decline of 6% in FDI, 2019, before COVID in South Africa. So there's not much there, really, while the world economy is doing so poorly.
All right, so meanwhile, in Southeast Asia, that region, the 15 countries have formed the world's largest trading bloc, covering nearly a third of the global economy. And people are seeing this as an extension of China's influence in the region. Where does China's BRICS partners benefit from this? Or is it, we're going to carry on and good luck to the rest of you?
Yes, that's probably the expectation, that China especially will now look to the east and southern parts, especially Japan and Korea. That's why it's the biggest ever trade deal. But don't forget the timing. It's very important that this has happened as Donald Trump leaves, I think we all hope, leaves the White House, and Joe Biden comes in. Now, Joe Biden has a different view, more of a traditional, we could call it a neoliberal free trade view, in which the World Trade Organization is a critical weapon that the US, with its European allies, it's often wielded to split the BRICS. Often they'll pull, you know, Brazil. Brazil is very tight with Trump at the moment, as is India. But I think with Trump going, Biden will reassert this WTO, which Trump had actually sabotaged. He wouldn't allow the appellate court within the WTO, the judges, to be reappointed. So unlike Trump, the isolationist, let's call him a paleo-conservative, dinosaur age conservative, America first, we'll expect Biden to put global corporate interests first. And I think that might be why they did this rush, you know, sort of trade deal before Biden comes into the White House.
All right. So as we start to kind of wrap up, I just want to get a sense from you. You've been watching the BRICS project right from the beginning. Has it delivered? Has it given us anything that we can say belonging to this club has really been great for South Africa?
Well, look, if we were talking about the Jacob Zuma years, when South Africa joined 10 years ago, until the last summit he attended in 2017, before turning over to Ramaphosa a bit early, you know, in 2018. Then what Jacob Zuma got was an opportunity to be anti-imperialist. And he would say again and again, he said, I was poisoned because I brought South Africa into the BRICS by Western intelligence agencies. So he certainly used the BRICS as part of a sort of talk left, walk right routine. But at the same time, the most important debate has been, should the BRICS overthrow world finance and get rid of the US dollar and try and de-emphasize the IMF, the World Bank, by starting the BRICS New Development Bank and a contingent reserve arrangement, an alternative to the IMF. But you can see this year a huge debate in South Africa, because South Africa went to the IMF and the contingent reserve arrangement alternative was never on the table. So it wasn't real. As for the BRICS Development Bank, they did make $1 billion loan and they've made other loans, but these have been bound up. Critics will tell you all the details in corruption. In Eskom, in Transnet, Trans-Caledon Water Authority for the Lesotho dams, and now the loan that went for the COVID-19, where there was plenty of corruption. That means the BRICS New Development Bank isn't necessarily an improvement over the World Bank. However, what we really need to ask is whether these institutions are against each other, the new BRICS institutions and the old Western institutions, or are they quite tight? And it's there where maybe Zuma would do an anti-imperialism. Ramaphosa will actually be doing a sub-imperialism. He'll be more within than against. And I think that's going to be the trick in the next period with Biden, who's going to re-emphasize the legitimacy of Western-dominated multilateralism. He said it very openly in the Foreign Affairs Journal article this year. And whether the Xi Jinping and Vladimir Putin alliance against the West will draw South Africa or pull us apart remains to be seen.
All right, and then perhaps finally, COVID-19, the story of 2020. Russia claimed that they have a vaccine. India, one of the hardest hit countries in the world. China also developing vaccines. Do we get preferential treatment, do you think, in terms of help when it comes to vaccines as they come through?
Well, very briefly, we need it desperately, don't we? Because we're potentially looking at a second wave here, and they've had second and third waves in the West, and it really is important to get the vaccine, without doubt. Don't forget that it was India and Brazil getting together against Western pharmaceutical companies that made AIDS medicines, generic medicines, affordable 20 years ago. And activists here, the Treatment Action Campaign, were able to get those medicines into the public health system. 7 million people getting access. The life expectancy was 52 at the bottom. It's now 65. So we have a great precedent. The best thing these BRICS countries did, really, was getting an alternative to Western AIDS medicines. Now, can the vaccine travel? And it's a great disappointment, I think, to all of us who saw in 2018 a BRICS vaccine center being proposed for Johannesburg, but it never happened. And so we've seen Russia say, well, we'll share with our own East European community and our hinterland. And China has some deals. They may share a little bit with Africa. But the possibility that we could get our generic companies to produce vaccines, that we could work with this big Brazilian market, well, with Jair Bolsonaro, the Brazilian president, a COVID-19 denialist, with Modi still allied with Trump, it's a very hard block to put together for something that is perfectly logical, getting vaccines out to the masses of people who need it. I think there's still too much politics in that one.